The crucifixion of Jesus Christ, pivotal event in the New Testament, is more than just a historical occurrence. It fulfills Old Testament prophecy. This episode signifies Jesus' ultimate sacrifice for the sins of humanity, set against a backdrop of betrayal, suffering, and the realization of ancient scriptures. Jesus' choice to endure suffering, rather than avoid it, reflects his unwavering commitment to fulfilling God's will and his boundless love for humanity. His determination is vividly demonstrated as he carried his cross to Golgotha, the place of the skull where this profound event unfolds, as detailed in Matthew 27:27-31. At the climax of the crucifixion, Jesus was nailed between two criminals, with a sign above him proclaiming, "King of the Jews." Surrounded by mockers and enemies, he suffered the agonizing pain of crucifixion, with nails driven into his hands and feet. Around the 9th hour, he cried out in Aramaic, "Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani," meaning, my God, why have you forsaken me?" This anguished cry sparked confusion among onlookers, some thinking he was calling for Elijah. One man offered him a sponge soaked in sour wine, while others waited to see if Elijah would come to rescue. Matthew 27:46-49. This moment, filled with deep emotion, reveals the intensity of Jesus' suffering and the profound mystery of redemption. Jesus' cry from the cross mirrors the opening words of Psalm 22, creating a profound connection between his agony and the scriptures. His exclamation, my God, why have you forsaken me?" stands out, as he usually addressed God as Father in the Synoptic Gospels. In this moment of deep anguish, Jesus expresses the emotional and spiritual weight of his mission, quoting a psalm that speaks both of despair and ultimate vindication. Psalm 22 ends with the affirmation, "You have answered me. I will declare your name to my brothers. In the midst of the assembly, I will praise you." These words highlight not only Jesus' suffering, but also the redemptive purpose behind it. In this transcendent moment, Jesus experienced the full weight of humanity's sin, bearing the divine wrath meant for sinners. As Paul later wrote in 2 Corinthians 5:21, "He made Christ, who knew no sin, to be sin on our behalf, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God." This sacred act secured humanity's reconciliation with God, making us acceptable before him. By enduring the withdrawal of communion with the Father and absorbing God's wrath as a substitute for sin, Jesus manifested the greatest act of love and sacrifice. This act reveals how even the darkest moments can fit into God's redemptive plan. Isaiah foresaw this mystery when he wrote in Isaiah 53 verse 10, "Yet the Lord was willing to crush him, causing him to suffer. Good pleasure of the Lord will succeed in his hand." Even in suffering, God's plan for redemption triumphs. The spiritual agony Jesus endured on the cross, facing separation from the Father, was the true source of his torment. The moment the temple veil was torn in two, symbolizing the reconciliation between God and humanity, the greatest spiritual transaction took place. God transferred the guilt and wrath of Jesus, who bore it fully, satisfying divine justice. While the physical suffering was immense, the spiritual agony, being condemned for our sins, was the most unbearable aspect of the crucifixion for Jesus. This was the cup he trembled to drink, cup filled with God's righteous wrath against sin. Before his arrest, in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus prayed earnestly to the Father, asking if this cup might pass from him, yet submitting fully to God's will. Luke 22:41-42. In this moment, we see his profound humanity as he faces the crushing weight of impending suffering and death. Luke presents Jesus not only as divine, but also as one who intimately understands human weakness and pain. In the garden, Jesus' humanity was on full display. On the cross, he bore the penalty deserved by countless souls because of sin. Isaiah 53:3-5 captures this sacrifice powerfully. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. Jesus' anguished question, why, finds its answer in his voluntary choice to take the place of guilty sinners. He, who was without sin, became sin so that through his sacrifice we might become righteous. This is the heart of the redemptive story, a love so deep that it transcends the greatest suffering. His cry from the cross echoed the words of David in Psalm 22, a psalm that remarkably foretold the sufferings of the Messiah. Though David's experience was real, it served as a foreshadowing of Jesus' ultimate suffering and victory. The crucifixion of Jesus is not just the fulfillment of prophecy, but a demonstration of God's divine plan for humanity's redemption. Psalm 22 begins with a cry of abandonment, but ends with hope and deliverance, mirroring Jesus' journey from suffering to salvation. This connection underscores the truth that Jesus' suffering and death were not random events, part of a divine plan revealed in the Hebrew Scripture. As Christians reflect on the crucifixion, they are reminded of the magnitude of Jesus' sacrifice and the depth of God's love. Crucifixion stands as a continuous call to faith, gratitude, and a deeper understanding of the love that secured our salvation. Jesus' cry from the cross, while a moment of deep agony, ultimately reveals the path to redemption, ensuring that his sacrifice would echo throughout history, offering hope to all who believe. The crucifixion of Jesus Christ, as recounted in the Gospels, carries profound lessons that extend beyond its historical context, offering an insight into love, sacrifice, faith, and redemption. As one of the most significant events in Christian theology, crucifixion serves as both a reflection of human suffering and a testimony to the depth of God's love for humanity. By exploring this story, we can draw essential lessons that resonate with believers today, providing guidance on how to live lives of purpose, faith, and compassion. 1. The power of sacrifice. One of the most powerful lessons from the crucifixion is the concept of sacrifice. Jesus' decision to lay down his life for humanity illustrates the ultimate expression of selflessness and love. Despite being sinless, he bore the weight of the sins of the world and accepted a painful death for the sake of others. This act teaches that true love often involves sacrifice, and that sometimes we are called to put the needs of others ahead of our own. In our daily lives, this can manifest in various ways, such as giving our time to help someone in need, offering forgiveness when it's difficult, or standing up for others, even when it requires personal risk or discomfort. Crucifixion also reminds us that sacrifice is not easy. Jesus prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, asking God if it was possible to remove the cup of suffering from him, but ultimately surrendered to God's will. This moment reveals that while sacrifice can be difficult and painful, it is often necessary for a higher purpose. Jesus' willingness to endure suffering for the greater good teaches us that life's most meaningful contributions often come through personal sacrifice and endurance. 2. Faith in the face of suffering. Another key lesson from the crucifixion is the importance of faith in the midst of suffering. Jesus' cry on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" reflects a moment of deep anguish and a sense of abandonment. Yet even in this moment of profound suffering, Jesus did not renounce his faith. His cry, quoting Psalm 22, shows that even when he felt forsaken, he was still turning to God in his pain. This teaches us that faith is not about avoiding suffering, but about trusting in God's presence and purpose, even when we don't understand our circumstance. Suffering is an inevitable part of the human experience, but the story of the crucifixion reminds us that God is with us in our pain, and that there is meaning and purpose even in our darkest moments. Jesus' endurance on the cross encourages us to hold on to our faith, knowing that, like him, we may emerge from suffering with a deeper understanding of life and our relationship with God. 3. The fulfillment of divine purpose. The crucifixion also reveals that God's plan for humanity often unfolds in ways that we cannot immediately comprehend. From a human perspective, Jesus' death might have seemed like a defeat or a tragic end to a promising ministry. However, from the divine perspective, it was the fulfillment of centuries of prophecy and the key to humanity's redemption. This teaches us to trust in God's plan for our lives, even when it doesn't align with our own expectations or understanding. Isaiah 53 verse 10 reminds us that it was the will of the Lord to allow Jesus to suffer for the sake of humanity's redemption. Sometimes we are faced with trials or difficulties that seem incomprehensible. But the story of the crucifixion teaches us that even in those moments, God is working for a greater purpose. This lesson encourages us to be patient and trust in the unfolding of God's plan. knowing that what may seem like a loss or failure can ultimately lead to greater growth and spiritual victory. 4. The nature of redemption. Central to the crucifixion story is the theme of redemption. Jesus' death on the cross was not just an act of physical suffering. It was a spiritual transaction in which he took upon himself the punishment for humanity's sins. Through this act, believers are redeemed and reconciled with God. Crucifixion teaches that redemption is a gift of grace, not something that can be earned through human effort. For Christians, this lesson is profound, as it shifts the focus from trying to earn favor with God to accepting the grace and forgiveness that have already been provided through Jesus' sacrifice. Redemption through Christ is a free gift, but it also calls for a response, a life lived in gratitude, faith, and obedience to God's will. This understanding of redemption encourages believers to live with humility, knowing that they are not defined by their past mistakes, by the love and grace that have been extended to them. 5. Call to compassion and forgiveness. The crucifixion also exemplifies the importance of compassion and forgiveness. Despite the betrayal, mockery, and physical torment he endured, Jesus forgave those who persecuted him, praying, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Luke 23:34. This act of forgiveness, even in the face of extreme injustice, sets a powerful example for believers. Jesus' capacity for forgiveness challenges us to do the same in our own lives. When we are wronged or hurt, the natural response is often anger or a desire for revenge. However, the crucifixion teaches that forgiveness is a fundamental part of living in harmony with God's will. It reminds us that forgiveness is not about excusing wrongdoing, but about freeing ourselves from the burden of resentment and embodying the love that Christ demonstrated on the cross. 6. Strength and vulnerability. Finally, the crucifixion teaches us that vulnerability is not a sign of weakness, but a source of strength. Jesus' suffering on the cross reveals his humanity and vulnerability, but it is through this vulnerability that he accomplished the greatest act of redemption. The willingness to be vulnerable, to admit pain, to express sorrow, and to face challenges head-on is often where true strength lies. In a world that often equates strength with power and control, crucifixion offers a counter-narrative. Jesus' vulnerability allowed him to connect with humanity on the deepest level, showing that true leadership and strength come from serving others and being open to God's will, even in the face of suffering. Conclusion. The crucifixion of Jesus Christ is a story rich with lessons about sacrifice, faith, redemption, and forgiveness. It teaches that true love often requires personal sacrifice, that faith must be maintained even in the face of suffering, and that God's plan for redemption transcends human understanding. Moreover, it calls believers to a life of compassion, forgiveness, and strength through vulnerability. As Christians reflect on the meaning of the crucifixion, they are reminded not only of the depth of Jesus' love, but also of the example he set for living a life in alignment with God's will.